Alright, this is Tuesday, May 22nd, as we get into the second day of what we have going into. Once again, yearbook dance tomorrow. You can buy tickets for $5. If you wait till tomorrow, I think the ticket prices go up to $6. If you want your yearbook, you're going to have to get it there. You can still buy yearbooks, but they are $40, but I've yet to have a kid regret buying one. If you have any old books or school supplies, you can donate them. If those of you who are turning in stuff, as you turn it in to me, I grade it and put it on Skyward. The sheet over here won't change because that requires me to print paper. But I do update everything on Skyward as soon as things are turned in and graded. I update them every day to try and help you out from there. Yeah.
When you say tomorrow it's $6, does that mean at the door, or like if I buy it at what?
They keep changing back and forth.
Okay.
I just know today is 5. At some point tomorrow it becomes 6. Sri Lanka.
Do the Skyward grades include the B points?
No, those have not been updating. Those are just the missing grades. And those of you who are wanting to write when she's done, if you bought your spot, then you need to go over and grab a marker and then just stay low, and you should be fine. All right. Once again, candy, stuff like that afterwards from there. With story-wise, yesterday's story was highly entertaining and involved you laughing at me a lot. Today's story does not. Because today's story is a much sadder story. There's not as many times to laugh at me. Because the drawback with yesterday's was easy for me to go back and laugh at because I was basically a dumb kid. The one that I'm going to get to today was me as 14 years old, and it's not me as a dumb kid. It's me making legit poor choices. And so this story is a little harder for me to tell because it hits closer to home. Tomorrow's gets a little easier and goes back up to a bit more laughing at me stuff. But today is sort of a not as much. I mean, you might laugh at me just like the fact that you see me get emotional and you're just like, ah, hilarious, you're in pain. But not like yesterday where it's like the actual laughy bits. But to finish out yesterday's stories, I didn't quite get to the very end of it, so I'm going to walk you guys through that. You guys seeing the pictures of the house that I actually got arrested in. That was my actual house where I was. And so I think we left off with you guys with me running and the guy chasing and the cops coming to get me.
Yes.
And then so the cops could not put handcuffs on me. Not because it was illegal, but because it was like putting handcuffs on straws. My hands were just so thin and like twiggy that my foot would have fallen straight off. So instead, they're just like, "You're a bad kid." And they just like walked me out there. And they took me to the car and they drove me to my house. Literally a 15-second drive. Like the other house is right on the other side of it. I'm not sure why they didn't just walk me down the street. But they drove and then pulled up to the house. I remember walking up to the front door with the 2 police officers behind me and me standing there, and them like ringing the doorbell or knocking on it. My mom coming out and she just looked at me. She was like, "What's going on?" I'm like, "Is this your son?" They're like, "She's like, yes, it is." Like he was breaking and entering. We caught him in the house down the street. And there's that moment of, what now? Like he was breaking and entering with 2 other youths into a house down the street. She looked down at me and she was like, "Is this true?" And all I did was like, and she was like, "Ugh." And then she was like, "Yeah, we believe there was another kid," and they described my brother. She's like, "Yeah, he's here. He's right upstairs." And so they had to go get my brother, who did what any good kid would do when the monsters chase you. He ran upstairs and hid under the bed. And so they had to drag him out by his, like literally from his feet. It's like, ah! They dragged him out and then brought him downstairs. And they went and tracked down the 4th grader at his house, and they brought him over there also. And it was all of us in there with parents. We're sitting in my family room, and the cops were like talking to us like, "Do you understand what you did is a crime? And if you were any older than 8 years old, that we would have to like arrest you and take you to jail. But the last thing I wanted to do as a police officer was tell an elementary school kid how what you're committing is a crime." And so they yelled at us, and we were like just being all upset. And like the next time this happens, like this is going on your record, and the next time you get in trouble, it's going to come back to haunt you. You can never get in trouble again. I'm like, "I'll never get in trouble again. I'll be a good kid. I'm sorry, sir." And so it made an impression on me. And it really did, because it kept me from getting arrested for like 5 more years. And so that's really good. Thank you. I was pretty proud of that one too. And so I did well, and so that was the last time I got in trouble until my freshman year of high school. And so now we get to jump to the next one. And this one's where it gets a little bit tougher for me. Because, like I said, with the last one, I was an idiot, and I was just a little kid. I don't remember it as well, and all I remember is like the fun parts and like the getting yelled at the end. Here, I was bad. I made poor choices, and I absolutely deserved everything I got with this one. And so it started during my 8th grade year. In my 8th grade year, I wouldn't say started hanging around kids, but there was a large group of kids that I knew and interacted with who started shoplifting. And so it just became the thing to do. And they would shoplift CDs from the store, back when you didn't just buy music online. And they would shoplift CD players, electronics, and then bring them to school and sell. Like, they would shoplift everything. And it became a big thing in my school. And I remember seeing these kids, and I thought they were idiots. Not because they were shoplifting, but because they were just idiots in general. And I was like, if this idiot can do it, I'm smarter than them. I'd be much better at this than they are. And so I decided to try my hand at shoplifting. And the problem was, I was right. I was good at it. And it's not a thing I should have been good at. Looking back on it, I wish I'd been bad at it, because then this story would take a whole different path. But I wasn't. Turned out to be a thing I had a lot of skill at. Now, I told myself that I was not making as bad of choices as them, because I was not stealing CDs or anything like that. I stole two things, and that was, well, not two objects, but two types of things. I stole candy, and I stole comic books. And that was the only things I stole, because I was a humongous dork. But I was a humongous dork that was a criminal and a thief. And so I started stealing the end of my 8th grade year, all the entire summer between 8th grade going into being a freshman, and then the whole beginning of my freshman year. I would steal to the point where I got good enough at what I did that I would shoplift in front of policemen. I remember there was a little drugstore down the street from my house we could ride our bikes to. I remember I would ride my bike down to it, and one day I went in there because I was planning on getting some candy because it was the summertime, and I walked in, and there was a police officer there, and I was like, oh, I guess I can't. Or can I? And I decided to step up to the challenge, and I remember shoplifting right in front of the cop. And I'm like, you'll never catch me because I'm so good at what I do. And I did. And I remember walking out, and I'm like, see you later, officer. And he's like, see you later, good kid. And I'm like, ha 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 ha. And I remember walking out, and I was like, I'm so good. And so I got to the point where I would shoplift so much candy, I couldn't eat it all. I started going to school and just giving out candy to other kids. And I would just show them, candy for you. I'd make it rain Crunch Bars. Because that's just what I would do. And so this continued in through beginning of my freshman year. And so I was on the wrestling team. And I started wrestling in 8th grade and went on to the wrestling team as a freshman in high school. And when you get to high school, wrestling starts much earlier. It starts in September as opposed to here, it doesn't start December. And so we started at the beginning of the year. And so this was around November that this particular event happens. And so I'd been shoplifting throughout the school year, and then after school we would have wrestling meets. And much like here, when we have a wrestling meet or a sports thing, you have to go to the coach's room after school or go home. High school is a little different because you're big kids. And in high school they'd say, hey, don't get in trouble, be back here at 4:30. Go do whatever kids do. And apparently what kids do is get in trouble. And so I used to go to school in Noblesville. And so right behind Noblesville High School, there was McDonald's there and a strip mall, which had a little grocery store, and they had a drugstore and stuff like that. So we would go over to McDonald's and eat a bunch of food, and then we would go to the drugstore and stuff like that. And so I remember we'd gone to McDonald's, and we're going over to the drugstore. Well, earlier in the day, I'd seen a guy in the hallway, and he was using this stuff called Banaka breath spray, which is a little container, and go psh, psh, and you can spray it into your mouth. To make your mouth smell all minty if you don't have gum. And he was using it to mac on the ladies, and it seemed to be really successful. He's psh, psh, and walked how you doing? The girl's oh, your breath smells so good. And I was well, I want to mac on the ladies, and whatever skills I had were not working. So I thought if I had breath spray, it would help me mac on the girls. And so I decided, it's a term, it means so I decided I was going to get some breath spray for myself. And so that afternoon, after we left McDonald's, we went over to the CVS that was there. And I remember going through the CVS trying to find the breath spray. And I have a package of it because a horrible student bought me one a couple of years ago. After I told this story, she showed up the next day and she's is this what you got in trouble for stealing? Ha 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 ha. And I was it was. And she's it's for you. And I'm I hate you. She goes, I know. And so this is what the package looked like. It has a little bubbly packaging thing. And so walked into the CVS or Walgreens, was some kind of drugstore, and it had these double glass doors, not automatic ones because this was back in dinosaur times. And so instead of the slidey magic ones, they had ones you had to push with your actual arms. I know. Like,
Wow.
it's crazy.
Wow.
And so,
Why would you go
and they had you came in through here, like the front door, like the pushy doors, and there's like a glass wall so that you could like exit and then enter, and that way you could like cross over. It's weird. So anyway, you come in, like go into the rest of the store. Remember, I came into the glass doors, was walking through the store, and couldn't figure out where the breath spray was, and eventually found out and picked it up and was walking through the store holding on to like a little package like this. And I figured I'm just going to steal it because it was like $3. And I was like, that's so much money. I much prefer the price of free. And so I decided just to take it. And so as I'm walking through the store, I just rip open the packaging. So I just take out the little bit that was there and then cram the packaging just like between two things. I had walked all the way down to the last aisle where there was no one around me. And I was walking down this last aisle, which was just like the wall of the place, and like another like the aisle right here. And it's like no one could see me. Rip it open, cram stuff between things, take the little breath spray, put it in my pocket, turn the corner, and then keep going. I'm like, easy peasy. No one's gonna catch me. Things are good. Walk through the rest of the store, and then end up going, like seeing my friends who were out there also shoplifting because I hung out with horrible people. But you'd know that because I said teenagers. And so I was walking past them, and they were also in the process of shoplifting because that's what kids were doing at the time because we were bad kids. And I remember walking past the front little checkout area. And there's a little glass door. And I had gone through like the first push glass door and had gone through the first door and then turned to my right, and I had grabbed the opening to get outside because I told my friends, like, I'm just going to meet you guys over at the schools. Like, I don't want anything. I'm just going to head on back. Like, all right, I'll see you there. I'm like, cool, man. So I opened up the one glass door and I turned my right to grab this glass door. And as soon as my hand grabbed that door, hand came down on my shoulder. And when you're doing something wrong and the heavy hand comes on your shoulder, there is a feeling, and if you've never had it, it's hard to describe, where it just feels like something has died in your stomach and then all of a sudden gained the weight of lead and is trying to reach your toes. It's just a whole, I was just holding on to it, and the hand comes on my shoulder, and this deep voice goes, were you planning on leaving? I'm just like, oh. And I look this way to my right, and there's outdoors in this big glass windowy thing. And a thought goes through my head.
Run.
I don't know who this is behind me, but whoever it is not a wrestler. I'm a wrestler. And there's you see where my brain is going. And I'm like, and my hand's on the door, so all I have to do is, I know the move to get out of this hold, because that's not even a very good hold. Wrestler. And so it's an easy duck, shimmy, spin, door open, I'm outside, and I'm running. And I'm planning this in my head when there's a follow-up thought that goes, there's a bunch of wrestlers that are in there that'll give up my name in a heartbeat because kids are horrible people. And they would quite happily rat me out. So which is worse? Getting arrested right here, or having them give up my name, and me getting arrested tonight at the wrestling meet, or back at school, or in my classroom, or at home, because I know they're going to give up my name because I don't trust a single one of them. And so I had that thought going through my head when the guy started to spin me around, and I had to make a split decision.
You chose
wrestling.
And I let go of the door. And it was one of the toughest decisions I still at this time remember going back and just being that whole, yeah, and releasing it and the door shutting and the guy turning me around. And it was the pharmacist in the big white coat. And he turned me around and he was like, were you planning on paying for that? To which I wittily responded with, what are you talking about?
Oh,
I know, I well thought out. I was proud of it too. And he goes, son, we saw you put it in your coat. Were you going to pay for that? To which I followed up with, what are you talking about? Because it worked so well the first time. He goes, let's go back and watch the video where you can watch yourself put it in there. To which I followed up with, what are you talking about? Because I didn't have any other argument to use.
Why didn't you just say you were going to pay for it?
Because that would have been a much smarter response, and that's probably what the guy was giving me a chance to do, but I was in brain meltdown mode, and so he turned me around and walked me through the store.
Oh,
and so I got walked through the store with his hands on my shoulders, and my head down staring at my feet as he walks me back through past all of my friends, past the little cash out girl, and through, like all the other parents that are in there. As we walk through, I remember as we passed like aisles, wrestlers would come pouring out of the aisles, like come and like watching me and stuff like that. And I'm like, don't look at anyone, don't look, like big boys don't cry, big boys don't cry. And I'd go from there and led me from there into the back little swinging doors. Like these two metal swinging doors. Led me through there into this back room area. He goes, have a seat. And he grabs this metal chair and pulls like, and pulls it out to the middle of the room and just like, sit down! I'm like, okay. And I sit down in this little chair, and he's like, so I'm going to call the police, and we're going to see what they have to say about this. I'm like, okay, whatever you say. And so I sat down, and he goes over this little phone from where I'm sitting, a little swinging doors to my left over here, and he just goes up, and he's like, I have a shoplifter here. He's like, send a unit over, whatever. And I'm just like looking at the ground, and I'm just like, don't cry, don't cry, don't cry. And he's like, fine. And he takes the packaging, and he has the little, he had me give him the breath spray, and he had the packaging I'd shoved in the little wall area, and then he put it down on the desk. He's like, stay there. And then he leaves. Like, just like walks out, and just leaves me sitting there. And I mean,
no. So why did you pick it back up?
Oh, don't worry, it gets worse. And so I'm sitting there, looking around in this back room with like the packaging and like all the storage stuff. And I look to my right, and about where Sierra is an exit door. It's just a door, just sitting there that says exit.
Like a fire alarm.
It does, but it has a little alarm will sound. But I figure by the time I get out the door and then get to me, once again, wrestler. But then I realize once again, if I'm on camera, how hard it would be to take that camera, because I figure by now my friends have left, so they're not going to rat me out, so I should be safe. But at the same time, if they have me on camera, I'd hate for them to like take that video into school and be like, do you recognize this miscreant? They're like, yeah, he's on our honor roll. They're like, not anymore. And so that's what I had going through my head. So I really, really wanted to run, but I did not. I would like to say I took the better choice, but I think it was the scareder choice. So I sat in the chair, and I just stayed there, waiting to see what would happen next. I remember I had a couple things go through my head. One was that this was the end of my life, the fact that I've screwed up everything. Two was that I'd watched gangster movies. And in your gangster movies, you don't give your name, and you fight the police, because you can't let the man get you down. And so I was like, coming up with the fake name, I was going to give the police, because I was not going to give them my real name, because they weren't going to be able to get me that way. And so, hey, welcome back. And then also, oddly enough, my English class came back to me. Because in my English class, we were memorizing poems that we had to recite in front of the class. And I was memorizing a Shel Silverstein poem called The Queen is Coming. I was like, the Queen is coming, the Queen is coming. And it's about this farmer talking to these different animals. And so I kept going over that poem over and over again in my head, because that was what was keeping me from crying, because big boys don't cry. And so I was sitting there just like, the Queen is coming, the Queen is coming. And I just kept reciting. By the way, when I finally had to recite it in class, I nailed it. God, I got arrested. Best practice ever. And so I was sitting there reciting it in my head, going over and over. By the way, a quick side note, just to make this even worse. Found out there was no video camera. I was what's called an idiot. Because when I stole it, and I walked down that wall where there was no one around me, turns out the wall at the end was all glass. Because it was the pharmacy. And there were pharmacists on the other side of the glass wall watching me walk toward them down the area, just going, they're like, is that boy, did he just do that in front? What kind of moron? I was like, I just kept going. The things you find out later. If I had known that then, I would have been gone. But I didn't, which is why the pharmacist said they had me on video camera. So I'm sitting there until eventually double doors swing open, pharmacist comes back in, and there's a police officer with him. And the police officer walks in, he's a big guy. He's like, is this him? And the pharmacist is like, that's him. And he like points down like the passion is over there. And the police officer's like, stand up. And I'm like, okay. He's like, turn around. I'm like, oh, okay. And he puts handcuffs on me. Which if you've never had them, one, congratulations. Two, they're awful. They're really cold. I think they keep them in refrigerators. They hit your arms. They're awful. They're really hard, naturally, because they're metal. But the level of pinching that is involved is spectacular. Because when they go clickety, 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 it pinches into bones that you don't know can be pinched. And then when you make little squeaky sounds, it seems to make them even happier. Not the handcuffs, but the officer. I don't think the handcuffs have emotions. But it was like, yeah, and he's like, and I'm like, but it's till to this day, I remember the handcuffs and how awful it was. And he put the handcuffs on me behind my back, and then did the whole arm raising thing. And then led me back to the store. Like picked up the Binaca and the little container, and then puts it into his pocket, and then he leads me back to the store.
You did.
I know. I think evidence. I'm like, well, there's evidence for me too. That's why I took it in the first place. And so led me back to the store. And a couple of things I can remember as I go back to the store. One that still haunts me. As soon as we came to the double doors, like this big back aisle area. I remember looking to my left, past the officer, because he was on my left, and around him there was a mom and a daughter. And I remember the mom looking up and seeing me, seeing the police officer, and then grabbing her daughter and moving the daughter behind her. Like, yeah, that exactly. Like, I'm such a horrible person that small children have to be protected from me. The irony of that now. But at the time, it was heartbreaking. I remember looking over and it was like, hey, little, what are you... Oh, God. And just that the guy kept walking me through. And I remember having going out, like around where luckily, none of my wrestling friends were in the store, so I had that going for me. And then walking past the little checkout area. Yes, sir.
I have this for Sebastian.
Sebastian, he's right over here. Thank you. Walking past the little checkout area, and then we got to the double doors, and the officer opening up the double doors. I remember him opening up that second one, and my thought was, last time I touched that door, I was free. But now I'm not. And then he opened the door, and we stepped outside, and his police car was right there on the curb, like the little lights going. And I remember him walking me straight over to this car. But I looked down to my right, and you could see along the edge of the building, and there was like this little edge of it where the alleyway was. And there were 3 heads, like little totem poles, looking around the edge. And it was 3 of my best friends on the wrestling team who'd stayed to watch me get arrested. Because that's what friends do. And I like looking around there, and I remember the officer, I was looking over and seeing him and then laughing. He's like, you've got a fan club. And I'm just like, oh. And he took me over to his police car, opened up the door, had me sit in the front seat. I couldn't, he had hold my arm. I was like, I can't balance. And he put me down. I remember in the front seat, there was a shotgun bolted to the dash with the barrel pointed right at my face. And it was one of those awkward things. I had to sit down like this barrel. I'm like, oh, that was weird. And I had to sit down like it was sitting right in front of me. And I sat down, and he had to do my seatbelt for me because obviously I couldn't. And then he came around and then sat down next to me. And I remember what he said to me, which I'm sure seemed like a small thing to him, but had an impact on me because I still remember it to this day. He sat down and looked over at me and gave me just this disgusted look and just goes, try not to steal anything while you're in my car. And then started it. And it was just that crushing feeling of little 14-year-old me. And I'm like, I'm a horrible person. And then drove. And in Noblesville, it's a small town. So it was literally a 4-minute drive from there to the police station. And then drove to the police station. I don't remember much at the police. I don't remember getting out of the car or anything like that. The next memory I have that sticks with me was being in his little office. It was an interrogation room, but it was a small office, the size of my desk area. That was slightly smaller than his office. And I remember sitting there, he had a desk, and he was typing in a computer, and I had to sit at the chair facing him. At some point, he took the handcuffs off of me. I don't remember them coming off. I remember just sitting in this chair, and having to give him all my information. I gave him my real name because I was not the hard thug I thought I was. He was like, what's your name? And I'm like, I'm David Brovicast. And he's like, oh, typey. And so he gave me all the information from him having to call my mom and telling her on the phone, me sitting there watching. He's like, yep, your son was picked up for shoplifting. Yes, he was picked up for shoplifting and all that. And I remember her on the other end of the line. I couldn't hear her voice. I'm just I cannot imagine what's going through her mind right now. And then gets done, and then he does, police officer work. And I'm just sitting there in this chair, once again, trying not to cry, big boy. And so I remember sitting there, looking around this little room, trying to keep myself from crying or going insane. And to my left, there on the wall that was there, were a bunch of wanted posters. with like all these criminals, like little mug shots and stuff like that. And I thought it was kind of interesting. I'd never seen a wall of mug shots before. And so I remember I was looking over them, like reading the different things and stuff like that. So I was sitting there, and the officer looked up at me, looked at what I was looking at, looked back at me, and then just goes, yeah, you're going to be up there someday. And then just kept going. And once again, it's just like, and just like crushing little 14. So I just like looked down, like I'm not going to look at anything with the ground from now on out. And I remember just looking down at the ground until my mom showed up. I remember my mom coming in, the door opening, and her stepping into where I was. And then her walking over. There was no yelling or screaming. She just walked up, and she was like, is it true? And well, actually, no, she hugged me first. I'll give her that. Stood up, she hugged me first, and then she goes, is it true? And I looked down, I was like, yeah. And she just, no yelling, she just goes, I'm so disappointed in you. And then just turned around and walked out. I'm just like, do I go with you? I'm like, I don't know how this works. And so I just followed after her, and she just walked out, and then there's like a little checkout thing. There was a desk you had to go through, and we walked out to the car, and I just followed behind her. There's no yelling or anything. I remember the car, she had this old Pontiac Bonneville. And I remember she sat in the front seat to drive home, and I sat in the passenger seat. And I sat down next to her. And I remember I put my feet up on the dashboard, and I wrapped my arms around my legs. And it was November, so it was still cold out. I had a jacket on. But I leaned my head against the window, and I remember just like staring out the window as we drove home, and her talking on the drive. And there was no yelling at any point. It was just, this is not how we raised you. You're not the son that I thought you were. You understand how disappointed I am in you. You understand that moving forward, I don't trust you anymore. It was just that was just so much worse than being yelled at. I was just like, I'm breaking inside. And then we get home, and my brother was home already from school. So then I came in, like went straight up to my room. And then I remember she had to tell my brother what was going on, who was 2 years younger than me, and like looked up to me and idolized me. And I'm like, that's probably not going to happen anymore. And she was like, we'll talk when your dad gets home. And so I remember going upstairs, laying on my bed, and staring up at the ceiling, and being one of the darkest times of my life. Because the things that went through my head were, how does life change for me from here on out? What's going to happen tomorrow when I go to school and a teacher sees me? Because this was before social media, but this was not before kids talking to each other. And I knew my teachers were going to know. And so how do I make eye contact with my teachers tomorrow when I walk in? How do I look at any other kid when I walk into that school tomorrow? How do I ask out a girl from here till the time I graduate, when the first thing they're going to think about is the fact that I got arrested? So this changes everything for me. Do I even bother applying to college? Is this a thing that goes on my college? Can I even get into college from here on out? And so that's the idea of how much I had just ruined my life because I like to steal candy and comic books. And the fact that I stole Banaka was overwhelming. And then my dad got home. I could hear the garage. And him and my mom talking downstairs. And then he and my mom come upstairs and they sit down on the bed. And I sat up. And I had no idea what direction this was going to go. Because I'm like, this is a first. And so they sat down. And my dad didn't yell at me either. And I love my parents. And they're great people. And I absolutely respect them for the path they took moving forward with this. And they go, there's not much we can do to punish you that's going to be worse than what life does to you moving forward. Your punishment after today is the fact that you're going to have to live with what you've done and the repercussions of how people see you. Our job as your parents is to love you and support you. And you are going to need more love and support now than you've ever had in your life. And my eyes are just like humongous as I'm sitting there staring at them. They go, don't get us wrong. You're grounded. Like, that's a basic. But you're going to need our support. Your punishment that you have is you're going to school tomorrow. And you're going to wrestling practice tomorrow. And you're going to school the day after that. And you don't get to miss school. And you don't get to miss wrestling practice. And you are going to face the consequences for your choices. But know that when you come home, we will be here to help you get through this. And I'm like, okay. And I'm like, what happens? He was like, I don't know. He was like, you're going to find out, though. And we'll be here for you. And I was like, okay. And that was a scary night. Because my parents are smart. And they knew something was going to happen, and it happened. So the next day, I get to school, and I could tell even on the bus that some people knew something, because you could get the occasional turning and lookings at you and a few talkings, but when that happens, you think everybody's talking about you, even if they're not. But when I got to school, I knew they were talking about me, because I immediately had people yelling out Banaka in the hallway and stuff like that as soon as I started walking down, and breath spray. That was easy, because those were random idiots, and those are people that you can ignore. In all honesty, it was the more subtle things, and it was the people who didn't mean to be mean who were the most hurtful. I remember walking into my advanced English class, because I had been put into advanced English for the first time my freshman year. It was my first ever advanced English class, 2 months into it. And that was one of the ones I was most worried about, the first time being in an advanced class. And I remember walking into this class, and as I walked into it, having kids be excited, look up, see me, realize who I was, and watching their expressions change of excitement to fear, or not liking it, or not knowing what was going on. And it was just that whole, oh, hey, and looking away, and then just that awkwardness. And the one that hurt the most was a girl who, when I walked into the room, just looked up and saw me as I walked by her. She just moved stuff on her desk from the side I was on to the other side. And it was just that implication that I was going to steal her stuff. And it wasn't even I don't think she did it on purpose or even to be mean. It's just a thing that she did. But it's a thing that 30 years later, I still remember that. And it was just that idea that this is how people view me. This is how I'm going to be viewed by everybody moving forward. And it was rough. And it was every bit as awful as I would imagine, because part of it was just interacting with other people. The other part of it was just my imagination. And every time you see someone talk, you imagine that they're talking about you. And it was a rough day to get through. But then I went to wrestling practice. And it got worse. Because amazingly enough, coaches don't like it when you embarrass their team. Weird. And so I found out how my coach found out that I got arrested, because apparently the previous day at the wrestling meet, on the bus ride there, he was doing roll call and was calling off all the names as they were driving along. And when he got to my name, he was like, Broviac! And of course, I couldn't answer. And so he yelled my name again. A kid in the back of the bus yelled, he can't answer you because he's in jail! And so he's like, what? And the whole bus started laughing. And it's like, what are you talking about? He got arrested. And they're like, he got arrested for shoplifting. It was the most thing ever. We think it was breast pain. We don't really what it was. We saw the cop walk about. And they went into this whole story. And he was like, oh my. And he started cursing and stuff like that. So the cops don't really approve of it. Oh, quick timeout. I've never told this part of the story before. It just hit me. Speaking of bus rides. So later that same year, it was in March, 6 months later, we took a field trip down to Indianapolis to go to watch a play at the IRT. And on the way down there, we passed the prison. Passing the prison, yeah, I had a bunch of kids all looked over like, Broviac, is that where you were? And everyone turned and faced and looked at me and pointed out the window. And it was 6 months later. It was just that, I was like, ha, you guys are hilarious. Dying inside. And so it was one of those moments. And so that just hit me. I remember that one just talking about the bus there. So anyway, the next day at wrestling practice. Get to wrestling practice, and coach is not happy because I get in there because I was not allowed to skip because that was part of my punishment. And I walk in, and I'm like, sorry, I missed you yesterday, coach. He's like, uh-huh. And so he's like, all right, today, gentlemen, we're going to do throwing drills. If you don't know what throwing drills, as a wrestler, it's where you pick a person up and you throw them. You get along with someone your own weight, and you practice doing headlock throws where you lift them and they go through the air. And I'm like, all right, throw
Your
light does
and
that
so,
to me.
yeah, I'm like, I have a guy I normally practice with, and I'm like, hey, Joey. And then coach goes, Broviac, we've got your partner. I was like, mm-hmm. And he was like, Corey. Corey's our heavyweight. I was 140 pounds. Corey Laux was 265 pounds of muscle. He was not fat. He was a weightlifter, so he was big boy. And so he walked over like, Corey, smash! And he was like, you're going to work with Broviac for the throwing today. And I'm like, I can't lift him. And the coach goes, oh, Corey, I guess you have to do all the throwing. And I'm like, and he did. And so every time he was like, throw! Corey would grab my head and he was like, and I would just go through the air onto the ground. And it hurt a lot. And so eventually Corey got bored throwing the little paper doll through the air. So he got to the point where he would throw me, but then he would jump while he did it. So he would go into the air, and his body would land on top of me. And that made it even more. But I strong like a bear. I got through the end of it, and so at the end of it, we got through the whole practice, like the 2 hours.
Break it?
I didn't break. I mean, emotionally, yes. Physically, no. Apparently, the body can take a lot. And we got done. I'm like, I got through. I'm strong. And the coach was like, all right. His final little talk. He's like, so apparently, there's some members of this team who make poor choices and reflect poorly on the rest of us. And I don't like having our team reflected on like that. And I think it's time for the leadership of this team to help people understand that's not something we approve of. Do you understand? The rest was like, we understand, Coach. He goes, good. I wish you luck. And then he turns around and leaves. And the whole team turns to look at me. And I just went, oh. And so they, today, which would get a coach fired, then it was just a fun thing to do. We had what was called a throwing dummy. And a throwing dummy was this fake, it's like a mannequin, but it was stuffed and weighed like 120 pounds. And so it was like this fake person that looked like that. It was big and heavy. They picked me up and held me down and taped me to it with what's mat tape. And mat tape is this really thick tape that you use to tape 1,000-pound mats together so they don't shift. And so they taped me to it, my arms and my legs, and I taped my head to it. And they took turns throwing it through the air. And they was like, and they just throw it. It's like, ah! I just land on it. And they would just sort of flip it over and over again. They did this until they got bored. Until they got tired of throwing me around, and then eventually threw me into a corner upside down. And I was still taped to it upside down with my feet in the air and my head down. And then they just turned off the lights and left me there. And their intent was to leave me there till the next day. And I remember just sitting in that room upside down, staring into this darkness. And I was just thinking, I deserve this. Because I'd made the choices, and that this was a path I willingly went down. And so I deserved everything I had coming to me. And so I was using this to try and make me stronger. I don't know how long I was in there until eventually one of my friends snuck back in, and he brought a pocket knife with him before you couldn't bring them to school. Once again, dinosaurs. And so he snuck back in, and then he managed to cut me free. He was like, sorry, I couldn't come back any sooner. He's like, I had to wait till the seniors left. And I'm like, dude, I'm just happy you're here, period. I plan on being here until tomorrow. And so he cut me free. I remember going out, my mom picking me up. She's like, you're late. And I'm like, yeah, it was a rough practice. She was like, I bet. But she didn't really yell at me. She was nice. And we got in the car, then went from there, and then going home, and it was awful. And so there was one other thing I remember that I'm going to talk about the court tomorrow because it leads into tomorrow's story. But one other quick thing with this. I was still on the wrestling team. I refused to quit, partly because my parents wouldn't let me, and partly because I wanted to be strong, and I loved wrestling. And so I remember every time we had a meet after that, I would not go with the team. I would just stay back and do homework in the hallways. I'm like, I'm just going to stay here and sit. And I remember one of the days that we had a meet, they all took off, and I stayed in the hallway and just sat there and did homework. And this was, I don't know, a couple weeks afterwards, where things were starting to die down a little bit, but kids were still being awful and rude, and it still hurt. And I'm sitting there, and I look up to my left, and there's a kid named Travis walking down the hallway. And Travis was scary. Travis was a kid who got suspended from school on a regular basis, got in fights in junior high, smoked in junior high, was all in high school, wore cowboy boots, and he was the kind of kid that you're pretty sure had a pocket knife with him, not a pocket knife, like a switchblade with him at all times. Straight up like greaser kind of kid. And I looked to my left, and Travis and I had a couple run-ins in the past because he didn't like me because apparently I smiled too much or something. And so I remember looking up to my left and seeing Travis coming towards me, and I was the only one in the hallway. So I just like stared down, like doing homework, and I see him walk and stop right in front of me, and then turn to face me. And I'm like, don't look up. I just kept doing it. And I remember I just kept waiting. He goes, hey, aren't you Broviac? And I'm like, seriously, dude, you know my name? And so I look up, and I'm like, yeah. I'm like, hey, Travis. He was like, didn't you get arrested for shoplifting a couple of weeks ago? And I was like, seriously? You're going to start in on me? But I'm like, yeah, I did. It was a couple of weeks ago. I shoplifted the Naka. He goes, yeah. Life sucks, doesn't it? I went, what? He goes, it gets better. I go, what? He goes, when I was in junior high, I shoplifted pencils. One of the dumbest things I ever did. My friends made fun of me. My dad beat me for it. And kids made fun of me for a while. But you know what, kid? People forget about it and they move on. You stay strong, you'll be okay. And he just walked away. It was the weirdest experience of my life. I remember my jaw was just like, and he just left. I'm like, okay, Mr. Smart Person. And he went away, and in all honesty, and everything I went through with this, it was the best advice I got. It did. Kids forget about stuff. They have short memory spans. And they went on and some other kid did something stupid and they made fun of them instead. And my friends still made fun of me because that's what friends do. They help remind you of your poor choices. But it got better. And it was one of those things where, over that, I liked it. Tomorrow we're going to talk about me going to court and how that affects story number 3.